Welcome to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast, where we aim to help fellow veterinary rehab therapists increase their knowledge and elevate their practice. I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Anae Lloyd. Together, we bring you the latest insights, research, and information in the field of veterinary rehabilitation.
This podcast is brought to you by Onlinepethealth, a leading continuing education membership for veterinary rehabilitation therapists. With Onlinepethealth, you'll have access to a wide range of online resources to help you stay up to date with the latest techniques, advances, and trends in the industry.
Our podcast features in-depth conversations with leading experts in veterinary rehabilitation. They share their own experiences and knowledge to help you improve your practice. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out in the field, our goal is to provide you with the tools and the insights you need to succeed.
So join us as we explore the exciting world of veterinary rehabilitation and help you take your practice to the next level. Hey vet rehabbers, it's my 400th podcast episode today. So it started in 2017 as a twice-a-month podcast for that first year, turned into a weekly commitment in 2018, and I haven't missed a single week since, not one. It's honestly one of the favorite things that I have to do. I love the conversations, I love the learning, and I especially love connecting with vet rehabbers from all over the world. The podcast has introduced me to the most incredible people in our profession, and I'm really so grateful for that. So today I want to give a special shout out to a vet rehabber, Olivia Middleton. Thank you for sharing the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast on your Instagram stories. I'd love to gift you a limited edition Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast mug as a little thank you. So pop me an email at megan@onlinepethealth.com and I'm going to get that mug sent straight over to you. Now in this episode, I chat with Pickens about something we don't talk about nearly enough, and that's having an exit strategy to your vet rehab practice. Now I share my own experience of having to close my practice down, and I didn't have a really carefully planned exit. It was something I had to navigate in the moment and really taught me a lot. But Claire walks us through practical ways you can sell your practice, what buyers are actually looking for, and what makes a practice more valuable. She also shares 3 simple starting points for those who haven't even begun to think about an exit plan. And here's the thing, exiting your practice isn't only about retirement. It could be due to injury, maybe health problems, family changes, life circumstances that we never see coming. So it's all about being prepared, protecting what you've built, and giving yourself options. Now, if you have some spare time on your hands and you're thinking what to do, we have 3 free webinars available to you. We have Talking Tendons, Advances in the Management of Tendon Injuries in the Small Animals with Diane Messam. For the equine vet rehabbers, Luxating Patellas in Young Horses with Gillian Tabor. And for the hydrotherapists, Using Hydrotherapy to Manage Developmental Conditions in the Dog with Tanya Grantham. A quick word from our sponsors before we dive into today's topic. At Paul Prosper, we believe true pet well-being demands a 3-pronged approach: prevention, support, and rehabilitation. Our brands are trusted by veterinarians, universities, and rehab facilities alike. So whether you're looking to train, rehabilitate, or help your patients age gracefully, our brands Walking Pets, Help 'em Up, Respond Animal Therapeutics, Fit Paws, Muffins, Halos, Sleepy Pod, and Canine Carts offer effective, innovative, and proven solutions. You can sign up today to receive a one-time special gift for all our podcast listeners with your next order, and just head over to our special link, paulprosper.com/OPH. Now, I hope you enjoyed this milestone episode as much as I've loved recording it. Here's to 400 and to many more conversations with this incredible vet rehabber community. Hey, Claire, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, nice to be here again. Thank you.
Claire, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? We know that you're an author of a book. We've had you on the podcast before, which was so interesting. And we're actually looking forward to having you do some training for our business basics area of the Online Pet Health membership. For those of the listeners that haven't heard of you and haven't listened to any of those, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, I've got a long history in vet med, actually non-DVM ownership. So I've done the whole process. I've opened, administrated, and sold. So I've looked at this from all sorts of perspectives, including opening practices for other people as well. And I'm taking those all the way through the process, as well as managing practices that have been purchased by somebody else. So I think I bring a lot of different perspectives, and having seen this from every angle over the years, and met people impacted by the industry from every angle over the years and different specialties and different areas of the industry. So I'm kind of excited to bring these 3 decades of experience out to help others.
Yeah, so this is an unusual topic, and one that I think when we start our practices as like professionals, and I think this is like across the medical like profession. I think people that are doctors, people that are vets, vet rehab therapists, you start a practice and you never ever are thinking, I'm going to be selling that practice at any stage. You're just thinking about building. And I most definitely made that mistake when I opened up my practice. I actually had no goals. I literally just opened and I just, just followed whatever happened. The practice grew. And I think I did have in my mind that I was going to franchise it or open up another branch. But things completely changed in my life. And suddenly I had kids and I was in a stage where I actually wanted to spend some time with my kids and I tried to sell my practice. And I thought I'm going to sell, and then at a later stage, I can just open up again. And it didn't work. And I had a few offers from some vets. All of them wanted me to work there for a minimum of 5 years. And I realized then that I'd made a real big error and I had created a practice that actually wasn't sellable. And in the end, I actually just closed my practice down, which is so sad when you put all that time and effort into a practice. And I didn't actually realize any of that blood, sweat, and tears and all the time investment and financial investment that I put in. And I had to just close it down. So I thought this was a great topic because I think it is something that us as vet rehabbers are not thinking about. And life changes. Things happen in your life. You think, oh, I'm going to practice forever. Maybe you move, your husband gets a job in another country and you have to move for whatever reason. And so I think it's an important topic to chat about. And I think for vet rehabbers, just to have something in the back of their mind, if this is something that they ever want to do, that they are prepared for it. And they might even just prepare and maybe they never do anything about it. But eventually, you are going to have to retire, right? You will retire eventually. And so there is a time when you're going to exit your practice. So I'm super excited to chat about this topic because, for me, I've got a history where I made so many mistakes. So I'm going to share all the mistakes that I made. And I'm sure you've got a wealth of information about people that you've helped and you've seen all the things that they've done wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, life throws you some fun curveballs sometimes. It, it's nothing's linear, and even in my own planning, I was lucky. My mom was a VP for a banking chain growing up, so I heard about these conversations at the dinner table growing up. I knew in my original business plan I had to write this in. I had to write in an exit strategy in the original business plan. So I was raised knowing how to do this. However, life didn't go to plan, so there was some adaptation that had to happen along the way, and I think that's the thing that sometimes we don't necessarily know how to do. Like you got to replan your exit sometimes. So even if you did the things at the beginning and you put the puzzle together, sometimes you have to break the puzzle and put it back together to actually make an exit work. And it's a painful process sometimes, as you know. It's not always clean or pretty. Sometimes it's very emotional.
And I think the great thing is if you have set up your practice without any exit strategy in mind, that's actually also okay because you can do something about it now.
Yeah.
The important thing is to prepare for it because when the situation comes your way, you don't want to be in a place where you then are scrambling trying to get everything together. So let's chat about the most common like exit strategies, say for a vet rehab therapist. Like what are the things that could happen and these can be anything from somebody acquiring your business or somebody approaching you. I mean, we know in the veterinary world, this is happening all the time. There are these huge corporates. It's not so much in the vet rehab field now, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And there are some corporates kind of vet rehab practices. So share with us all the different sort of common exit strategies.
There's three of the most common. So one is somebody purchases the business, and that's the consolidation model where somebody, either buys it brand as is and keeps the brand of whatever you've built and continues to run the practice. That in that model is similar to the offers that you got, that they're going to try to get you to work it for a while because they want you to keep the brand going as is, and that's part of their revenue model is they're purchasing you in that model. They're buying time is really all they're doing. They're buying time to try to replicate you. So that's one. In the specialty areas, that's tough because the percentage odds of them finding another you just like you is difficult. I mean, we would all be lying to ourselves if we said that was easy for them to do, which is why it's a unicorn opportunity. The second one is where they buy just the database and maybe they merge that into an existing brand of a practice. So maybe they're consolidating practices and they're taking these specialties and they're grouping them together. So maybe they have a campus of specialties. They've got an oncologist, an ophthalmologist, and a rehab, and they're building a campus and they buy your database from you and they move that onto a campus. In that case, they might offer you employment as part of that. They may or may not want you to continue on with the brand. And what's most valuable to them is the client base and the goodwill that's built to become part of the specialty campus offering. That's actually a really strong business model. And if you're in an area where there are people building those campuses, that's something to plan towards. That's something that you can be a part of, and that's very strong. Another option is to do the same thing, but with a really large private practice. I mean, there are large private practices that build rehab suites into their large buildings that are, 12, 15,000 square feet. Maybe it's a mixed animal practice and they have a multimodal model where they have, maybe it's not as complete as your current practice, but maybe a rehab is an arm of what they do within that practice. And you can begin to sell your database within that to that practice, and you can probably start to mesh yourself in. And maybe that's an opportunity to work some of the time, start tapering down to part time, and incrementally sell your practice or completely sell your practice into this. There's a lot of decisions to be made in that, though, especially if there's board certifications involved. Do you want to keep your practice at that level of board certification? Are you okay with it not remaining at a specialty level and and going to a little bit less of a level? I mean, there's decisions to be made in that, and that's why it's so emotional, is that there's a certain place that people build their practice to, and you can get very tied to that when you build a practice up and when you sell it. And I think, anybody that's exposed to a lot of purchases and sales, and even when I sold my own practice, you get very tied to that. You get very emotionally like, will you run it the same way I ran it? Will you provide service the same way I provided service? And that's really, it's a dangerous place to go financially. It's a tough question to ask, and it can financially ruin the deal. You certainly don't want to sell to somebody that's going to provide poor service, but you can financially ruin the deal by dwelling on that too much. But those are the two most common, and then the third is succession planning, like grooming somebody up, like finding somebody that wants to grow into the field and finding a way to maybe partner them in, and then they successfully partner into the practice and then buy the practice from you. There is a little return to entrepreneurialism happening within the field, so it's becoming an option again. For a while, that just really wasn't an option, but it is returning again. There's some excitement there.
Yeah, I think the succession one, that's really when you're thinking of retiring. Then you get a partner in or someone, and then you can groom them and show them the ropes, and then they can take over. I think that's a great one. I think, you know, the field of vet rehab is, it's so new. We're only sort of getting to the stages where people are like about to start retiring, you know? We just, because it's such a new field. So it's interesting. I think there are a lot of people that maybe are currently now in that position. You know, if I think about it, I've had vet rehab therapists who've approached me to help them start online businesses. And that is, you know, they say they're thinking about winding down their practice and they're looking for something else to do. And that's been increasing over the last few years, like really having more people. And I think it's because the field has sort of reached that stage where we've had that first lot of vet rehab practice owners come through.
Mhm.
So thinking about, you know, your practice, you know, one of the things that can happen is that somebody just approaches you. So that can just come from complete left field. Like you're just happily practicing along, and somebody approaches you and says, you know, have you ever thought about selling your practice? I might be interested. So that's sort of one situation I think people need to be prepared for. And often, you know, I think the owner would be like, oh no, like I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And then maybe suddenly they start thinking, well, actually, this actually might not be such a bad idea, and I've got somebody interested. The other thing is, as I suggested earlier, is that maybe something happens in your life and you have to move countries, and then you're actually forced now to go and see if you can sell it and find a buyer for it. And, you know, one of the things that I think about when I had my practice, I spent a lot of time building relationships and you know, building relationships with local vet practices and with other vet rehab therapists. And I wish that I had sort of thought a little bit more about that exit, because as I mentioned, I wasn't thinking at all about it. But if I had to go back, I would have thought about those relationships and started sort of putting together my A list of people that I would approach if I was in that situation. Say, hey, these are people that really align with my core values. I feel like you know, if they had to take over my practice or buy my practice at any stage, they would do it justice, and I'd be really happy, you know, for my team to carry on working with this person. So yeah, looking back, I definitely would have done that. And so that's, I think, some advice that I would give you guys. If you're, even if you're not thinking about it, just start thinking about who are those people? Who are those people that if you're in that situation, you could approach? And then I guess the other situation that you might be in is if you're in having serious financial problems. And then once again, you might be forced to sell it. And that's a dreadful place to be. But once again, then you'll be looking at who you could partner with, or who could buy your practice. And if you're not prepared in that situation, especially because of the desperate place that you're in, you might end up selling to somebody that you probably wouldn't have sold to, or selling for an amount that you probably wouldn't have sold if you had a choice. You were just in a desperate place. Any other things that you can share around that?
Yeah, I think it's a business transaction, and I think it's one of those moments in life that you should consider when you're not considering selling. So you should think about selling when you're nowhere near selling. And that is the advice I would give to anybody at any stage of their business, whether you're just starting or you're 5 years in or whatever it is get a valuation on your business randomly. And brokers will help you with this. They will have a good conversation with you about your business to say, well, this is kind of what it's actually worth, and this is what the market looks like right now. And I think it's really important for people to know that, and it can take some of the emotion out of it. And the reason is that we all think about ourselves in our business and the value we create for our business. But the reality is, if you don't make yourself replaceable, your business doesn't have a lot of value.
Yeah.
You're selling it, you're leaving it. That your business has no value unless you can completely leave it and it continues to generate revenue. So you're not selling yourself with it, you're selling it without you. So I think, people need to look at it like that. And I hate to have to tell people this during the planning process, but you should think about what would happen if the worst thing happened that you can think of. A death in the family, a divorce, adultery, you lose a hand, you lose a foot, you go blind. Like, what would happen in those scenarios? What would you do in those scenarios with your business? How would you exit? Who would take over? Do you have an insurance policy that could help you out in those moments? And it's very morbid and it's very sad to think about those things, but it's also like it's also healthy to think about those things. And that is part of, I know we traditionally think of exit as just that moment that people retire or sell for retirement, but exit can come in a lot of different forms. And like in my case, it was there's some significant relationship issues halfway through the ownership cycle, and that completely changed the business plan. Completely changed it. Like there were going to be multiple locations. There was going to be a scalable factor to more than one practice. That completely changed 5 years into the business plan, which meant stop everything, shift the thinking, and start thinking about what it means to sell this one practice so that people can move on with their lives and start prepping it for sale. So that prep for sale started 3 years before the actual sale.
Sure.
Yeah. So like I think that like it's healthy to stop every once in a while and go, what would this actually be worth? And then just, maybe call up a third party that has nothing to do with you, doesn't know you, and is just a business person to ask that question.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like all those things that you say, you mentioned are like a whole lot of horrible things that could happen. But if you actually prepare now, so even if you haven't prepared at all, but you start now preparing, that also just gives you such peace of mind that if something should happen, in that state, all those kind of things that you mentioned, we don't have the capacity then to start putting all these things into play to exit. And that means that you exit probably getting a lower price for your practice. You might not be able to exit at all. Like in my situation, I mean, I was 8 months pregnant and, suddenly I had to just close my practice. I didn't have time to be able to, exit like I wanted to and to set it up. I couldn't change things. And, for me, the big problem was me. I was the problem. I had created my practice so that I was the most important person in that practice. And it didn't happen intentionally. It just happens. And it's very common in practices, and I think especially in vet rehab practice where we build such close relationships with our clients and we spend so much time with them. Average consults could be 45 minutes to an hour. So we spend a lot of time with our clients, with our patients. And so the relationships are very different to in a traditional veterinary practice. And because of that, I can remember whenever I went on holiday, I would get the locum in. The locum would just sit there the whole week. She would see one or two people that were just okay for her to see, and I would work flat out, like late hours the week before I left and the week after I got back. And it was because, I'd created a situation where everybody wanted to see me. And that is something that we've got to be very, very careful of. And, in hindsight now, if I look back, I loved it actually. I loved that it made me feel good that everyone wanted to see me. And it really stroked my ego, but it wasn't the best thing for the practice. And, thinking back now, I did have a few other vets that worked for me, and they didn't work for long periods. They would come in and say, for example, when I went on maternity leave, or if I was going on holiday, then I'd get a locum in and they'd usually come and work for me for a month or so before and just, see how the practice ran. And I'd have them as an additional vet. And, in that situation, I think that I could have sort of expanded the practice to a two-man practice, decreased my working hours, and set it up so that I actually elevated that other person a whole lot more in front of my clients and made them trust that other person. But I didn't. And that was definitely to my detriment. So I think one of the big things is not having anyone else to take over from you, and you only think you need that person when you go on holiday. But let's say something like health-wise serious happens to you. Let's say you actually can't consult for 6 months, a year. Then somebody is going to have to take over for that period. And in that interim period, I think eventually the clients do understand, and they think, well, she's sick, and they will, they will start seeing that new locum or that the new vet. But there's a lot you can do to help that transition so that it's just super easy. And that also would put into play if you wanted to exit.
Yes, and I see people do the same thing with their team too when they're preparing for an exit, is that they get so wrapped up in the team loving them that when the sale comes, there's a revolt that happens. Or like it's a, oh no, we won't work for anybody but the seller. Like we're not gonna, and so like that ends up dramatically putting the sale at risk, because when people come in to start doing team interviews, they'll say, well, we're just going to walk out, or unless you give us a $5 an hour raise, and it puts everything at risk to not prepare the whole environment to be without you. And it's okay for people to work for somebody else. It's okay for clients to love somebody else. It's okay for great Google reviews to come in that don't involve the primary person, or it's all right. I mean, I think that is the part that feels a little hurtful when it's especially sole proprietorship, especially businesses that are very driven by very close relationships and small teams. But if you really want to set your business up for success, and this was hurtful to me because part of the sale of my own practice meant I had to prove that it could run without me for 90 days. And so I had to leave the business for 90 days and show that the successor could run the practice
That's
independently.
not so bad. Forced 90-day holiday.
Yeah. So it was yeah. But it almost felt like kind of hurtful of like, well, there was like this tiny little evil voice that was like, you can't do it without me. But I wanted them to do it without me, but there was that little evil voice that was like, you can't do it without me. But that's bad. Like I shouldn't have that evil little voice. So really what people need to do is set themselves up for success. The red flags in a sale, if you're a buyer, are bad Google reviews, teams that are disgruntled, a system that looks like it can't run without the seller is a big red flag for a buyer. So yeah, that's the process is the most important thing. That's what buyers are buying, is the process. It's not necessarily they're buying the database, and they're buying the process. So the more you can do to set those parts up for success, the better. And as women, like, the children are a huge part of our life cycle. Like I mean, I was so young when I wrote my first business plan, and I feel like it was a little bit of dumb luck that I wrote the whole thing to pivot around their high school graduation. So, and that's how things kind of worked out. But like hindsight's 2020. That was a little bit of dumb luck that was the mile marker. It could have worked out a lot of different ways. It could have, life does what it does. So there's lots of people though that what you went through, that is not an uncommon scenario to hear about, either a marriage, a divorce, or a baby, or something like that happening.
Yeah. And I must say, it still burns me. I mean, it burns me. I had this great practice that I had to literally just, listening to what you say now about selling your database, I didn't even think about that. I literally just gave it away. I gave my data because I had to have my clients had to be seen. And I just said, please, can you see these? Can you see these? Can you see these? So, as you said that, I thought, damn, I should have got something from it and sold that database. But anyway, I didn't. So you guys can learn from that. If you are in a situation and you have a practice where it does rely on you, and you're in a place where you cannot sell it, sell your database, because there's value in that. Let's chat about the systems in a business, because when somebody is looking to buy a business, like you said, they want to be able to take over that practice without you. And the only way that's going to happen is with systems and processes in place. And this is something that I've learned over time. As I first opened up my practice, I used to just do everything myself. It was just me. And then I got an assistant. And then, the two of us would do things and I would tell her what I needed to do, but I was always overseeing her. And then as the practice grew and grew and there were more and more people, I suddenly started to realize we were just putting fires out left, right, and center. And they needed me in there and they needed me in there. And I was just feeling torn between every single room. And that's when I realized like we actually have to have systems. They have to follow a system every single time and for consistency too for the clients. And I started putting like a standard operating procedures manual together for my practice. And it was dreadful to do. And one of the things that if any of you guys are starting a practice now, just start doing this from the beginning, because when you have a practice with a whole lot of people, you don't have time to create these systems and write everything down. And it's a whole lot easier now, I must say. You can use AI and ChatGPT to help you a little bit with it. So that's definitely makes it easier. But it's so important that and it's not only actually to sell your practice. If you think about it, it helps if you have a new staff member, because there's a procedure. They don't have to keep asking, oh, how do I do that again? How do I do that again? Everything is written down and they can see step by step exactly how to do it. But that's how you're going to be able to remove yourself. Because if you remove yourself, somebody else can come in and just follow the procedures, and the practice will still hopefully run smoothly. What advice can you give around creating these systems and processes? And let's say for somebody who has no SOP manual, what advice can you give them?
Well, I think what you just described, if I'm an investor, I'm filling my portfolio with three types of practices. I've got the practice that is putting out fires left and right. That is a high margin opportunity practice. So I know that I could take a business operations professional. That practice is probably doesn't have an optimized margin, is what they're going to say. And they're going to send a business operations professional in there, which is going to cost them money. And they're going to go in and they're going to write an SOP manual for that practice. And they're not going to offer as much money for that practice. So they're going to give an okay offer for that practice, knowing that they've got work to do. So they're going to work on the processes, they're going to optimize the margins, because all of the lost margin is in all the extra steps that haven't been fixed yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like that from an investor standpoint. If you're like, well, what's the value of my practice right now? Your value could be lost in the fires, in the messy fires, that like the chaotic moments. And they know that. The investors know that when they walk in and do previews of the walkthrough. Or they could walk in and they're like, okay, well, I need a few practices in my portfolio that are steady, like reliable and steady. And they call them turnkey practices, where they could walk in, everything's written down. They could put any doctor in there. They could put any staff member in there, because that thing is so written down. Everything's got a chart. Everything has a process. And there's not a lot to do. It's super predictable. So that is going to get a great offer. Those kind of practices get great offers. They close very quickly, and they're great transactions, easy transactions. That's how you get your max offer from an investor. And then the third one is where it almost has, they call them like no low practices. They have no value or low value. And there's just so much stuff to fix that you're basically getting a database purchase offer, where they're like, there's not a lot here. So we're just going to like, here's how much we think your real estate is worth and maybe your database. And that is their way of saying there's just not a lot here. Like there's not a lot of value here, because maybe there's a bunch of bad Google reviews, and maybe the processes, or maybe the level of medical care is way in the past, and they've got to catch a whole bunch of things up. So those are the three ways that an investor sees a practice when they go and evaluate them. And I would say most practices fall in that middle category where they know there's some things they have to fix. So
Mm.
if you own the practice now and you can kind of objectively walk into your own practice and walk through like with your own little clipboard, like you're your own inspector, and go, ooh, gosh, if I clean that one up, then that actually puts more money in my pocket at the exit because I've just now cleaned something up that I can say is part of my value when I sell it, is it's less messy. There's less fires to put out. And now I'm in that category of practice that's predictable and steady and replicatable. So you see, you're taking it from one place and putting it, and you're investing in the exit value every time you do that.
Yeah, because I think when we think about when somebody buys a practice, I mean, the first thing most of us think about is they value it on the profits that the practice is making, and they do. That's a big part of it, right? But there are also other things that they're looking at because a practice could be profitable, but it could be running really badly. So it could be even more profitable. So if you are running your practice a whole lot better, it would be even more profitable and you could be offered even more money. But they're also looking at how much time and effort it's going to take them to go into that practice. And that's when the processes and systems come into play because they want it to be as simple and easy as possible. The more work they have to do, the less money they're going to pay you. And so these are the things that we got to weigh up. You might have a practice that's profitable, but maybe it's not running that smoothly, and that's going to decrease the value for them.
It's true. And now, with as much consolidation that has happened in the last 5 or 6 years, a lot has been learned about seller productivity versus the handoff to associates. And sellers are 1.3 times more productive than associates. So systems and processes mean more than they ever have.
Mm.
And so they know that when they walk into these practices and they watch sellers, they know you're buzzing around your own practice and you're doing everything at warp speed. And they also know that when they replace you, whoever they replace you with is not going to move at that same speed.
Mm.
So however the practice is set up and however it moves, its profitability is a little dependent on that. So how much equipment do they need to replace? How many processes do they need to improve? And I know like people think of it, it's simplistic, right? They think revenue in, I paid for a couple of staff members, I paid for some stuff, and then profit out. But most profit is lost in how people move around the building. That's how most of the profit disappears, is how people are utilized to care for pets. So like too many people or just lost steps, lost, like where did they go? When we went and took that lab sample and we set it down somewhere and then maybe we forgot about it, or put out that fire, or that client conflict resolution took 15 minutes when it could have taken 5 minutes, or all of those little things are where profit is lost. And like that's where investors know that. And so that's what they're looking at when they're looking at how can we optimize this business. It's not in taking inventory off of the shelf, and it's not necessarily in reducing the number of people. It's in how many steps do we have to remove from these processes to really like to kind of fix what's happening here, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. Is that?
Yeah, like basically optimize the practice.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen practice owners and that you've been consulting with make when they're exiting their practices?
Emotional outbursts. That's the number one, and that is a big that's a big red flag now. There's been a lot of learning around that. I think uh veterinary medicine has been so attractive as an investment opportunity for the last 7 to 10 years. It was overlooked, and a lot of people got away with it, and they were able to sell anyway, even with the emotional outbursts. But I would say that has dramatically changed. And these emotional outbursts are seen very differently now, and they are impacting the ability to hand off a practice. Um, and it's sad
You
to
mean that emotional like outbursts around the sale, or just people who just generally are like practice with, maybe the culture of the practice isn't ideal because they are reacting in inappropriate ways.
both.
Yeah.
So it can be levels of a little bit of dishonesty during the sale process of
Mhm.
what's happening culturally at that practice. And then when things surface and come to light, maybe some HR rules that weren't quite right.
Mm.
I would say it's mostly around staff treatment and HR rules. So I would say small business owners, if there's one topic that if they wanted to invest in themselves to learn about, if they intend to transition with their practice and work alongside a purchase, HR knowledge would be a big one, because that tends to be the thing that incites most of these emotional outbursts, is
Yeah.
not really understanding some of these rules, or not really understanding like the approach, or but it's just the attachment to things. It's like, is this still mine or is it not still mine? And I do think it's a therapeutic process. I've been through it myself, so I absolutely 100% understand how attached you can be to a business, the personal attachment. However, I think it's also very reasonable to say that people should possibly go through therapy alongside the sale of their business, and not take it out on all of the people within the business environment, or even the person that purchased their business during that process. Because that's
Yeah.
the biggest mistake I see them make, is that, like, don't go through that therapeutic process with those folks. Go through it like with a therapist. Like, that's because the feelings are normal. The feelings are rational, they're normal, they're
And
expected.
it's change, right? And we're all so resistant to change. And there's all the fears of, I mean, I think it also depends on how the sale, how it's actually going to happen. Like, are you going to keep working for them for a period of time, or if you're going to exit completely, there's also a whole lot of other fears around that. So, I mean, I can imagine if you're going to work for them, is it going to be the same? Am I going to have the same autonomy to be able to do the things that I want to do in the way that I want to do them? Or they're going to suddenly say, hey, you need to practice like this. And that becomes really hard when you've had your own practice and you've been the boss, suddenly now you've been told what to do. And there's a lot of fear in that, I'm sure. And then I've actually read a book once before. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was something like Built. Oh, it was called Built to Sell, and I can't remember the author's name. But there was a whole lot of examples, and it often spoke about people who actually sold their businesses and how they actually went into depression. Because, like, especially for us as like professionals, sometimes, our whole self is wrapped up in our profession, and it is who we are and our practice that is everything to us, and we don't realize it. And suddenly, you think this is a good idea. And I think this is a common thing with people who retire too, right? They think, oh, I'm going to retire, and then suddenly they're absolutely miserable, and then they regret it. They wish they hadn't have, or they're in the situation where they're working for someone and it's horrendous because now they can't do the things that they used to be able to do and how they used to do them. So there's so many things to think about, right?
There are, and it is that it actually, it feels like a death when you finally say goodbye to a business, whether you sell it or you close it, or whatever it is. It does feel like a death. For some people it's a thank goodness it's gone, if it was a nightmare in their life. For other people, like for me, I actually enjoyed, there were aspects of it because there was a relationship involved that I was thank goodness it's gone, but there were other aspects where I was scared to death to work for somebody else.
Mm.
Like, I actually don't consider myself a great employee because I'm more of an entrepreneur. So I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to go work for somebody else. This is not gonna work well for me. I'm a business owner, not an employee.
Yeah.
And these are terrifying thoughts. And that's So that's kind of at the baseline of why are there so many emotions in these sales. So I do strongly recommend, if people are going to try to make this move where they stay with the practice and they're going to do a sale and they're going to try to work with it, it's very vulnerable. They're going to ask a lot of questions. You might not have kept all the logs up to date, or there might be just like some little cobwebs in the corner that will be asked about. There's going to be digging into records. It's going to be a lot of things that feel very exposing. You're going to feel naked in front of the room. Like, that's normal. So you've got to process those emotions outside of the environment, and then find a healthy way to move on and pick up something else. I've had one huge piece of advice for sellers, myself included, because I should have done it sooner. Find some sort of like hobby to fall in love with that same gear that you sell, like something else to glomp onto, just to let your heart gravitate somewhere else quickly. Because it, give yourself some room to heal and move on, and hopefully not like buy another business right away, but like, move on, and allow yourself to the space to do that, because it is not just business. Actually, like, I did a little podcast on my own on that. It is personal. It is not just business. It is a part of who you are. When you own a business and you open a business, it becomes part of your DNA. It's part of your character and your makeup. And that's just a fact. So you have to deal with that.
So one of the podcasts that I do is called Behind the Vet Rehab Practice. And as we're chatting now, I'm actually recalling a conversation that I had with a vet rehabber who exited out their practice and had to work for 2 years. And she spoke about getting very emotional about it. And one of the things that she recommended was having a broker to help, because the broker just levels you, and you have the conversation with the broker and you can get all emotional and say my business is worth, or my practice is worth so much more than that, and you can get, I remember she said like she was very offended the first offer that she got, but they're going to come in low, right? And so she was offended, and she was actually just like, no, they can get lost. I'm not doing this with them. And all that emotion that you're speaking about. And so the broker just helps with that. And when they were negotiating, the broker did all the talking and just said to her, just keep quiet. And then one of the things that she mentioned, I remember now, is and I think this is a really hard part about setting a practice, because sometimes the team is not involved. So sometimes it's a personal reason for the owner of the practice, and in this case for her it was. And she could only let her whole team know when the deal had gone through. And so a lot of it she was shouldering herself, and there was this whole like due diligence phase that had to happen. So the agreement happened, they agreed obviously on the amount or whatever, and then she had months of having to collect information and gather information that they required in order to be able to purchase the practice. And I remember for her being very, very stressful. And she said probably one of the most stressful times of her whole life was in that phase, having to keep the information from her team, who she loved and trusted, and feeling this guilt of not including them, but knowing that the buyers were not happy about her involving the team, and they wanted the deal to go through and then share that. And so that was one of the prerequisites for her, and actually destroyed her relationship with her team. And when she went on then to do her 2 years, I think she actually didn't finish the 2 years. I think she had to come to some agreement with them. I think she did a year and a bit, because the team was so upset with her. And so these are things that you guys have to think about. These are things that potentially, might happen to you, that you would be in that position. And I mean, I can imagine for her, it must have been a dreadful position not to be able to share the information. and everything shouldered on her. But these are the things that happen. If the buyer says they don't want you to share with everyone, obviously a lot of the time, I think especially with these like corporate buyouts, they don't want the information obviously to get out there, right? They want the deal to happen and then to share it. I think with a smaller practice and one practice buying another one, or if there's a new vet coming in, I think they're more sort of transparent and actually okay and want the team to be involved. And because they want that when they take over, for the team to still be cohesive and have the practice culture. But yeah, that was that conversation, and I will try and remember what the and find out what the podcast number is. But that was a really, really interesting conversation from her, and she regretted it in the end. So at the end of it, she actually wished she hadn't sold. She said the whole process just was dreadful for her, and it wasn't a good process. But saying that she also hadn't planned very well at all.
Well, that's actually that's a really, really good topic. Because there's a couple components to being an employer that you have to protect yourself from. And I think anybody who becomes an employer eventually goes through what she went through. And that is I don't want to say it's an inappropriate level of caring about your team, but it's right on the edge of that. Like as an employer, you have one overarching number one duty, and that is to protect the longevity of the employment and the safety of the employment atmosphere for your employees. So that's duty number one as an employer. Like I'm going to make sure this is a safe place to work, and I'm going to make sure that this is a like something that my employees don't think like this is ending tomorrow, right? Like they
Yeah.
should feel like that. Their paycheck is stable and this is a safe place to work emotionally and physically. If you're providing that, you're crushing it. Like you don't where I've seen over the years leaders, not just employers, but even leaders, area leaders, regional leaders, local leaders, whether they own the business or not, where it gets a little dangerous is when people start referring to people as family, or if they care too far beyond an employment relationship, then they start to internalize something that really it goes past a business relationship. Because if we take a step back from the emotions, and this is why it's so important to possibly get therapy alongside these transactions. Because if you take a step back from the emotions and really look at what you're doing in the sale of a business, is what you're doing is protecting the longevity of employment. So as an employer, you're doing exactly the right thing for these employees. Instead of
Yeah.
closing the business and risking the shutdown of employment, you're extending the longevity of that business in the community, and you're extending the likelihood of that employment staying stable long term. Now, if over the course of owning that business, you set that precedent with your employees to say, hey, every couple of years, you know how like some people clean their closet like they're moving every couple of years? Like you
Yeah.
go in there, like I need to do that. I'm way overdue. Like
Me
go
too.
in there and like I just need to throw out all the stuff I haven't worn in 2 years. Well, you should do that to your business too. You should and with your employees. Like we're going to put our hard hats on and get our clipboards out, and we're going to walk through here like I'm selling this business tomorrow. Not in a scary way with your employees, but like we're going to pick this place apart, and we're going to keep this place healthy and ticking and running, and you're going to get that question from your employees. Are you going to sell this place someday? Yes, I am. I am, because I'm not going to work until I'm 110 years old. I am going
Yeah.
to sell this someday. Will you tell us when that's going to happen? I will tell you when I'm going to start preparing it for sale, but I will also tell you as part of due diligence, almost all buyers will not want you to tell the staff until due diligence period has passed. And that's to protect the sale, not to be
They're
nefarious.
scared of. They're scared somebody else is going to come in and because
No,
is
they
there a contract that like when you start the due diligence phase, doesn't the practice owner have to sign some form of contract that they won't approach anyone else? Or but I suppose if they're telling their staff can tell other people, and then somebody will say, "Hey, I'll offer you more," or then suddenly it's on the open market. So yeah.
They can tell they could well what happened becomes rumor mill. So everybody signs an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, and then what they're protecting is it not becoming rumor mill, like it getting onto social media. Like you tell a staff member, then a staff
Yeah.
member gets on social media and they're like, ah, they're selling the place, and then clients start jumping and going somewhere else because they're like, ah, they're selling the place. So that's what you're protecting. You're not,
Yeah.
it's not for nefarious reasons. You're protecting the rumor mill from starting.
Yeah.
But if you properly prepare your staff that like life is going to evolve at some point, and I love you, and I'm not, a business sale doesn't mean anybody actually died, even though it feels like that a little bit. It's business and it's going to transition at some point. And when it does, I'm going to handle it respectfully, and I'm going to choose a a purchaser that's going to protect the longevity of the business.
Yeah.
Let your staff know that like when the time comes, it's going to come eventually. And hey, I hope that you stay with this practice because you are valuable, but someday I'm going to leave it. Like, I think that's a healthy conversation to have, particularly when you're within 5 years of exit. Start having that conversation with your staff that you think is long termers, and then that can take some of the guilt out of it, because it shouldn't be guilty that you're moving on. Like, that's not a bad thing. Your life has to evolve. That's not bad. But I totally understand the emotions though, because there were people that didn't stay when I left. There were a couple of staff members that chose not to, and that's their decision. But there were others that did, and that's great. I'm glad that they kept their employment. They're still there. I mean, it's been 8 years. They're still there.
Yeah, listen, it's everyone's choice, right?
Yeah.
And all you can do as a practice owner is choose the best person to buy the practice that's going to hopefully continue the practice like you have. Um, can we finish off by sharing maybe like, let's talk about the vet rehabber who hasn't prepared anything. Let's talk about how I was, right? So haven't prepared anything. What are 3 things that they can do right now to just prepare themselves if this has to happen for them? Because like it can seem really overwhelming. And right now, after our conversation, they're just thinking, oh my gosh, like I actually just don't know where to start. So let's give them a place to start.
Well, I think the first thing I would recommend is to understand your active client base, because that is the value of your business. So just, that's the first thing that anybody that would be buying your business would look at. So that's the thing I see most people maybe don't understand the best about their own business is active client base. And active client base is who's coming within a year, about how many active clients within a year. The second thing I would do is the next time you're at a conference, casually start talking to brokers and just get a landscape for what does it look like. Just have good conversations with brokers and ask them like, so how long is it taking these days if people put it on there for specialty practices, general practices, like our database is easy to sell, or like, what's it looking like for solo practitioners, or, but I think those casual conversations can add a lot of comfort. And then, do the stereotypical, what does the next 3 years of my own life look like? Or the next 10 years look like? Do I have any life events that I think I might need to start planning for pretty soon? Because you really should start prepping a practice 3 years ahead of, if you have that luxury, you should start prepping it 3 years ahead of time. If you don't, you can do it within the same year. But if you have the luxury of time, 3 years is the ideal time frame.
And then, of course, a business coach, Claire, I think you help people with things like this. So, if you're in that situation, just reaching out to a business coach, having a few, even online consultations, getting a checklist of things that you should have in order, and just going through your practice with a fine-tooth comb with somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Because it's quite easy to think, oh, well, I'm just going to do my standard operating procedures. But there's a whole lot of other things. There's things like contracts that you have to have with your team members. There's financial things and tax things. There's so many different things that need to be in order if you're selling your practice. So yeah, if you're in that situation, you want to get prepared, find help. Don't try and do it on your own. You'll be overwhelmed. A checklist is a great way to go.
Yeah. And don't beat yourself up. If you're having feelings, address the feelings. Like that's normal. That's fine. Don't try to hide them and don't try to stuff them down.
Great, Claire. Thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation. And yeah, if any of you need any help, Claire, where can they find you?
My website is smallbusiness-dreams.com, and that is the best way to kind of read about some of the things I offer. Both of my book links are there, and you can reach out to me there as well.
Thanks, Claire. And we'll share all those links in the podcast notes. Thanks so much, Claire. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. I'm here every week talking to vet rehab therapists from all over the world about all things vet rehab. A big thanks to our sponsor, Paul Prosper. Their sponsorship allows us to be able to give this podcast to you for free, so please go and check them out, paulprosper.com. Don't forget to bookmark the next Vet Rehab Summit. It's on Saturday, the 31st of October, 2026. Come and be a part of the world's largest online veterinary rehabilitation conference created specifically for you, the vet rehabber community. Online Pet Health members get VIP complimentary access to the Vet Rehab Summit. For more information about continuing education for vet rehabbers, you can go to onlinepethealth.com. And if you want access to our free membership, we update the webinars in this area every 3 months. You can sign up at onlinepethealth.com/free.